I'm Craig Torres with the Global Rewire podcast and my co-host Fabio Natalucci. Fabio, today's guest is a good follow to our conversations with Luigi Zingales, Matteo Maggiore, and Logan Wright. I came away from those conversations convinced at how strange it must be to run a company in today's world. And I also came away with a sense of paradox. Markets are on fire, but each of these three cited quite a bit of risk out there in geopolitics and geoeconomics. And as you pointed out, Fabio, these risks are somewhat uninsurable. Who knows if the government's going to tax your revenue or show up and want a stake in your company or simply put tariffs on something you're selling or block it from being sold abroad. So I thought having somebody with capital at risk would be an interesting perspective on this state of play. And today we have Davide Serra, the founder and CEO of global asset manager Algebris Investments. So Fabio, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So very, very pleased to have Davide on the podcast. Davide has been someone I've been talking for, I think, since the financial crisis. It's one of the most sophisticated investors that I actually know. It's a global business, so it can bring a global perspective. It's not shy. That's one thing I always enjoy talking with Davide. It's very candid in his view, even when it's not with the mainstream. But more importantly, it's a really good friend of mine. So I'm really, really happy that he's here with us. So Davide, maybe one starting point, picking up where Craig was. So we talk with various people on this geo-economics issue, and we cover kind of like the U.S. perspective, like hegemonic state. We cover the Chinese perspective with the China expert. I was curious just to start off, what is, as a European with a global business, the European perspective of these times where we have geopolitical upheavals, innovation, climate issues, demographic issues. There's a lot of regime change going on at the same time. So even from Europe, at least from this side of the Atlantic, Europe feels at times squeezed in the middle. So I was curious about what your perspective is.
So I would say from a European perspective, it's clearly being squeezed. And the reality is, because over the last 30 years, the main political class here has been particularly hypocritical. So if you think about it, expenditure for social welfare doubled, GDP grew only by 50, so productivity lost about 50-60% with the United States. Basically, politicians were buying votes, handing out cash that future generation ought to pay. And at the same time, they were cutting in defenses. So Donald Trump has the right point. And we were buying cheap energy from Russia, financing Putin, and selling highly qualified manufacturers, whether were German cars or Italian Prada shoes, to Chinese and Americans. I'm simplifying. Now, in all this, you also have ASML, which is the most important company in all the chip world. So no SML, no TSMC, no TSMC, no NVIDIA, just to be clear. So Europe holds the keys to AI, because no ASML, there's no NVIDIA and no AI. So to be honest, Europe, in a way, in my view, has been living a bit as a free rider with two major powerful bloc, US and China, competing, and we keeping a very neutral position and staying between. Now, this neutral position, in a way, came under attack, like Switzerland itself, in the moment in which Putin decided to attack Ukraine. At that point, Europe, on a resolute basis, unified against Putin and clearly sided with the United States. And then at that point, basically, this position became unattainable. So I think, and this is summarized in Mario Draghi report, Europe needs to get its act together fast. Means first, break down all the internal market barriers, which right now are way too many. Secondly, be able to create national and European champions that they can compete properly with the United States and Chinese. Now, are we capable of doing it? I just mentioned one company, Airbus. You'd rather fly on Airbus than on a Boeing today around the world. So, and there's no wide body Chinese plane yet. So from the point of view of can we get our act together, the answer is yes, we can. Have we done it enough time? Answer, no, we didn't. And so I think it's literally, last call. When you are late for a flight and it goes red on the board and it says last call, that's it.
Do you have a feeling that there was a window that kind of opened for Europe to play a role in the global stage? And then, at least seen from this side of the Atlantic, you think about banking union. You say Unicredit trying to buy commerce and some politics that kind of like slowed it down, if not shut it down. You think about capital markets union. Okay, you rename it to something else, investment saving union. There's no risk capital in Europe, essentially, can be put at scale. It seems to me that the window is there, but the time frame over which Europe can actually step up the game, they don't overlap those two timing. How do you address that?
Yeah, I think actually the problem is there are two axes. I think it's deeper. First, Europe has lost its attitude for risk. This is a continent where anything you look at, one side in America, there is almost, no risk. I mean, you can take fentanyl. 500,000 people died of fentanyl with OxyContin and everything was okay. Here in Europe, anything you take is risk, risk, risk. So I think there are two attitudes of risk. Probably in the US, almost too much. And in Europe, almost too little. Now, this then it's representative of an older aging population in Europe. So it's also demographics. And at the same time, unfortunately, what Europe failed is, if you think about it, we have de facto 4 levels of bureaucracy state. You have your own hometown. You have a province that typically is an aggregation of town. Then you have what you call in the state. Yep, that would be like Pennsylvania, New York City, and for us would be Italy, France, Germany. And then we have the EU that we use the federal. But when you add it all up, in Europe, this accounts almost to 45-50, while in the States, it's well below 30. And so the difference is that 20% difference in public vis-a-vis private is what allows the US to have more innovation and still attract the best talent. I was recently with the former head of research of OpenAI and chief technologist for Tesla, Mira Morati, probably one of the brightest brain on AI. She's an Albanian DNA lady, and 70% of the best brain working AI today in the States have a EU passport of some sort, or European passport, sorry, whether it include UK, Russia too. So we're not short of brain here. We're short of risk appetite and clearly risk capital. And too many people have been hired just to be referees. So we're becoming the country of bureaucrats and people who do nothing, but just tell others what to do. That's very sad.
Davide, Fabio and I discussed whether the urgency of developing a defense industry is giving rise to defense startups. There's a whole ecosystem of new defense startups in the United States and quite frankly in Ukraine as well. Because they have to. We have to go this way to lighter, cheaper, unmanned tech warfare. Can that happen in Europe, or and can you get technology transfer out of that like we do in the States?
Yeah. So I think actually, in a way, in my view, Donald Trump has been very positive in breaking down the European hypocrisy. So this idea that you can be a geopolitical actor but have no defense, that Germany could have bullets for 3 days. I mean, it's an insult to common sense. So I think the wake-up call has arrived loud and clear. I wish had happened before. Didn't matter how, but it's there. Secondly, I think Europe will rearm, and it's positive. And on this, I want to remind everyone that, when Europe rearmed, Europe knew how to use arms. Yep. So we've been fighting war every 30 years for the last 5,000 years. And if Germany rearms, they typically in history knew how to use arms. So, And by the way, I think this is positive for a simple reason, will reinforce Europe to have a solid army, will be able to stand its feet, will have to deal with hot pressure using European soldiers. I mean, I remember when we had in the 80s and the 90s, the Balkans Civil War and some atrocity. We had to use US forces. And this was next door. We were 80 kilometers on our shore and we couldn't do anything about it. So I think it got to a point where, defense expenditure being cut too much because we increased welfare expenditure, mainly pension and hands out, to a level that was unsustainable. And so I think we need to rebalance the two. And there's no way out. And I think the US correctly so said, guys, you're too rich not to look after your own military.
What about tech transfer into the private industry from defense innovation?
It's happening because,
Okay.
the reality, before there were no money, it's happening. For example, now Leonardo, Thales, and Dassault have agreed to merge the free space division. So we're going to make an Airbus for space to compete with SpaceX and Elon Musk. Because we need to have our own, first of all, we need to have our own satellite system to be able to have our own data. And then we need the rest of the ecosystem. Now, if you look in terms of, military technology, we are close, to the US, where we're behind. Even in missile, we're competing. Still not military, but, we'll get there on military. The UK's Shadow Storm, good enough. The reality is now we have this fantastic, the only real European army is the Ukrainian army. And by the way, the Ukrainian army probably defended by NATO allies, and so far money and bullets have been 50-50, Europe, US, together. Now money, Europe has gone ahead of US, all in, as it should. I think taking that ecosystem experience, merging it with all the brain we have and the money, talent can remain here. And I see plenty of startups and plenty of developments happening. So I'm confident we'll get that. Now, it's going to take 3-5 years. I just had dinner recently with the CEO of Rearming, the largest bullet maker in Germany. Ukraine survived because they had 5 million 155 millimeter shell left from the Soviet Union. US produces 500,000 yearly. Europe was producing 200,000. Now Europe is scaling up to be able to make 700,000 because, we have 20 years of understocking. And so, it's going to be 3-5 years of significant military defense build up. And then at that stage, I think it will keep on. There will be a trickle down in terms of innovation, researcher that can keep here, startups are going to stay here. And as a result, I think that innovation transfer that has happened in the States over the last 20-30 years, hopefully will happen here too. Maybe not at the same speed, not at the same scale, but the ground is very fertile. And we're not short of brain. We're just short of capital and the willingness to do it.
David, ultimately, it cannot be only paid for the public sector, right? Debt to GDP numbers are high, deficits are wide. How do you generate private capital, like risk capital in Europe at this point?
So I think short term, though, one point, the only country that has a public debt to GDP below 70 in the world, it's Germany. So the US is now 130, as high as Italy. Rest of Europe is 95, thanks to Germany at 70. So at least Germany has $1 trillion to spend easily. If you think 10-year Germany is 2.5, 10-year US is 4. So Germany can borrow much cheaper than the US, and they can spend. So I think from this point of view, I think Germany can do it. And it's a blessing that they can do it. Imagine had this happened at a time where you couldn't spend money. Then would have been game over. And I see mobilization across Europe. And remember, we had the UK inside. You have French, there is a nuclear power. If you take the nuclear industry of France, run about 60 nuclear power stations, US is 95. and the France nuclear station keep on being built, meaning they know how to build one. If you look at defense, Europe has very strong on navy and helicopter. Our planes, I would say, are okay. Now the issue is to get all these together, but I think we will get that, and we'll get there for a simple reason, because the US said you have to. So your number one partner said wake up, and secondly, you have a guy at the border that now has putting 25% of its own economy on a war footing, and the guy is not going to easily take off the pedal off the accelerator because he transformed his own economy in a war economy. So you better wake up.
There's been a lot of discussion about US exceptionalism. Right? Particularly following Liberation Day, there was a time where it looks like flows were coming out of the US. I don't think that's the case anymore. You're still seeing inflows into equities, for example, in the US. There's no signs of money capital leaving. The only thing perhaps you see, and that explains the side move of the dollar, is like hedging, like more hedging for currency risk, but you still global investors still trying to take underlying exposure. What is your perspective on the US exception and the role of the dollar at this point?
So I would say, if you look at the number, net financial position of America, US owns $30 trillion to the rest of the world. And the reason, because it has been such a great place to deploy capital, there was a queue of people investing. So 20 trillion of foreign capital is in the US market, and 10 trillion is in the US Treasury market. So in this, it's exceptional. Now consider the Europe net financial position, meaning people in, people out, is +5. So Europe owns more money than it owes to anybody else. China +6. It is very hard to invest in China. Japan +5. They have more money inside than they have outside. So US has been winning. At the same time, is partly vulnerable if these foreigners were to decide to go back home. Why? For the simple reason that they need to invest at home. So in a way, this America First is telling the European guys, wake up, you need to invest. Well, with which money can we invest? Well, we have lots of money invested with you. We might want to take some and break it fair, So this could happen. Secondly, what I noticed, I was born in 1971. This has been the worst dollar market since I was born in 1971. So clearly someone has been hedging the dollar. Now, not Americans, but probably some of that 30 trillion of dollar assets owner that said, hey, still a great place, but at the time when the reserve currency on full employment, market at all-time high, it's has a current account deficit of about 5 to 6%, 7, between fiscal and current account, twin deficit running close to 6-7%, and not changing for the foreseeable future. So in the administration plan, there's going to be no change. They're clearly reflating the economy big time. But that means that maybe, you want to hedge part of your dollar exposure. Also because today the US has this conundrum, has won so much that it's 66% of global money. So 66% of what is investable is now a US ticker denominated in dollar. Now, it only accounts for less than 30% of the global economy. And to the rest of the world, US industrially used to be 50, now it's less than 20, because that GDP, a lot of it is services. Yeah, it's your Apple, your Netflix. Yeah, but it's not something you actually buy and use every day. It's not a car, it's not a ship, it's not a plane. Yep. And as the result, I think that will be tested in the coming years. And I think you just need to see the price of gold as the only proper reserve currency with no politician, no central bank, no debt, no military, what has done this year, to tell you that clearly some doubts are emerging on the fact of how much US exposure you want to keep. Because if you are a passive investor today, you have 66. Now, 66, when it's less than 30% of the economy, it's a lot.
Fabio and I had a piece out on Dow Jones Friday where we cite the long list of risks, fragmentation, the possibility that inflation doesn't drop back to 2. We also cite the investment going into AI. So how do you invest in the U.S. today, keeping risks in mind, but also understanding that this massive technological transformation is powering the indices higher? And is there any alternative to just staying fully invested and just watching your risks day to day?
Yeah. So say, first of all, if I had to, I only have 30 years experience. So, probably you want to have people which are longer than me. But I have enough white hair, at least. And first, anything I see globally, it's expensive. So if you tell me, is there any good bargain out there? Is there anything on sale? I tell you, I can't find it. So whether I'm looking at bonds, stock, even metals, it's getting pricey. Everything is getting, fairly pricey. And I'm talking top 5% valuation multiples on 100 years view. Secondly, the US, it's deregulating and printing money like hell. So basically you have a double shock. You have you can do job, which is very positive, meaning less bureaucrats, less filling fake paper forms, and getting done with a job, which I think is positive. Now, and at the same time, though, they are overstimulating, tax cuts, bringing deals in like hell. So short term, it's overstimulating the economy. Mainly though on AI. So if you see the overall job number, what's happening in the economy, the US is in a way splitting. You have part of the economy, mainly coast, so Wall Street and AI, so say East and West Coast, benefiting. I'm not clear yet that the rest of the value of the country is benefiting so far. I can't say it yet on the numbers. Maybe it's coming, but on the numbers that I observe, and now when the government works and I get the data as a caveat, so far it's not obvious. Now, the animal spirit effect is super positive, and you can see from retail engagement. So probably there were being too many years of ticking the box exercise, and what someone said eventually, you're free to go, and that it is compensating. At the same time, something eventually will have to give. Why? The US needs $2 to $3 trillion a year. That's the size of a deficit. The rest of the world only earns altogether less than 2. Now, they need to invest at home. In Europe, it's clear. The message has been loud and clear. You guys need to rearm. So we're spending all the money we have. But we don't have many, but the one we have, we're spending in defense. The Chinese are spending at home. They need to reflate their own property bubble. The Japanese are spending some at home, some in the States. Probably the Middle East spending more in America. But probably they need to rebuild. There are a few areas to rebuild domestically too. So net, the real issue is there's going to be lots of dollar on sale. And the key question is the equation between, dollar, 10-year, and whether all this financing need are going to be met because others don't have enough money yet to finance the US because of the sheer large size of the economy. Now, positive to it, if Donald Trump is able to, let's say, reduce price of oil by a regime change in Venezuela, very positive for oil price. Secondly, agree a peace, Ukraine, Russia, very positive for oil prices. And, the truce in Gaza, positive. So if we end up in a war with less confrontation, cheaper oil prices, that will further provide the stimulus to the global economy. Now, remember, US is net energy exporter. Which has been actually one of the biggest advantage US economy in the last 10 years.
Can I come back with a question with 3 questions to put together some of this? I think one is your views on, there's a lot of discussion here on AI, whether this is a bubble. How is reminiscent of the 2000, but just looking at numbers, how much is invested in data center? There are estimates out there of Wall Street consulting of $2-3 trillion.
With
how
debt,
much
right,
revenues
Fabio?
you need to what's that?
With debt, some of it.
Exactly. So the one is like, can you ever generate enough? Forget how you fund this, whether this is out of cash flow, out of that. Can you ever generate enough revenues to get to those numbers? I just picking on one OpenAI, they have $13 billion revenues now. They're not generating much money either, right? And then the second tier, it's starting to go into the debt path, right? It's not the hyperscaler only that use free cash flow. They start to issue debt, particularly through private markets. Curious your views on, I kind of think, I know your views on private credit. And then the last point on the energy piece, it is true the US is an exporter of energy on net, but these data centers are sucking in a lot of energy now. And in some places are actually straining the system.
Yeah. So I would say, listen, it's the number one question. I don't have an answer, but I'll make a couple of comments. First, everyone I speak to, they tell me there are two things that matter here: brains, CPU computing power, and energy. Now, the US, it's led, let's say, 30% by indigenous brain and 60, 70 by other people brain that went there. Some of these are moving back. China, 100% domestic. Secondly, CPU. US, a bit of competitive advantage, but not huge vis-a-vis China. So let's say 5%, 10%, a couple of months, but we're not talking about ages. Third, energy. China, massive competitive edge between renewable, cost of energy much cheaper, grid size much better, capacity of scale up much faster. I mean, in China, they build 7 new nuclear stations every 3 years. Last time US built a proper nuclear station was 30 years ago. So in number of brain STEM graduates, China will have 5 times the number of US. 5 times in the next 10 to 20 years. So if I look at pure resources not clear who's going to win. I will hold my breath. Then, if I had to look at the grid capacity, which is a real constraint, US has one of the oldest grids. Yep. And eventually, in some area, there'll be a fight. Do you want to have an hospital running or do you want a data center running? Yep. So there will be tricky choices to be made. The last point I made, in China is a society of engineers. So if they develop a tool, let's say a calculator, they want to give it to everyone to improve the masses. In the US, it's more about domination and making money. So it's closed source, few people are going to earn a massive rent out of it. I'm not sure who's going to win in the next 5 to 10 years. I have some doubts. Certainly then, if I see some of the circular reference deal, meaning NVIDIA finance OpenAI, that buys the cloud out of Oracle, the then invest in NVIDIA and I finance you, it's a circular financing where I give you 10, 10, 10, and the 3 of us now worth 300 more. Yeah, imagine the 3 of us. I give you 10 to Fabio gives 10 to Craig gives 10 to me, and now we are 300 better off. But we're going to do it again, yeah?
From a revenue perspective, it looks like revenues,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. This is revenue. I buy you, buy B, we buy the 3 of us, and we keep on getting rich. Now, that clearly doesn't add up. So there are clearly some sign of excess. But listen, right now, the hyperscaler are spending 60, 70% of their free cash flow, basically on NVIDIA chip. And then time will tell whether that was a good investment or not for revenues. I'll just point out that I never seen a computer that after 5 years was pretty much worthless in history so far. So let's see how these computers are going to be in 5 years' time. And in between, we need to find a revenue model, which is not clear. Now, we've been testing all of them, because we have, let's say, capacity of testing all of them spending. We were renting already DeepMind many years ago. They're helpful. I haven't found any Leonardo da Vinci yet, for sure. And if you give me a super top brain or an AI machine, I'd rather get the super top brain.
I think the concern is that you're starting to see some of the feature that people often use to define a bubble, right? A textbook bubble. The valuations per se won't do it, but you start seeing debt feeding into these deals now, collateralized with stuff, as you said, that maybe the loan is 10 years, but the collateral is going to go down very quickly. And you have this rush to do more that individually may be rational, but at the aggregate level ends up with oversupply. And usually these things end up with pain in the financial system.
And I would also say that the hyperscalers so far made money mainly on data and not investing capex.
Yeah.
So if I look at how
highly intangible.
Highly intangible. So they were super cash flow generative, and mainly because they find a way of mining data. So the beauty of mining data is you don't pollute the, say, earth, but it doesn't cost anything. Yeah, we were the product in a way. Now they're going the opposite. They are going through massive scale of investments that only railways and history and probably Chinese real estate did, and they haven't been tested in being a great infrastructure investor.
I mean, it could be that productivity explode in the system and productivity pays for it, right? There is a path there.
I agree. Sorry, that's the hope. Now, at the same time, we'll have to keep in competition. I'll give you an example. I drive a Tesla. It's fantastic. But I also tried a Xiaomi SU7. It's better and a third of the price. So the issue is, the day I have a Xiaomi SU7 available here, I love my Tesla, I'm gonna give it back and gonna drive my Xiaomi SU7. It's a third of the price and actually better. And BYD is 15 times earnings, Tesla 150 times. So, I don't think there's gonna be geopolitical consideration which car I drive. Yep. And, eventually you're gonna pick whatever is the best value for money and best look. And I think even in this AI world, there are going to be lots of this conversation. Why? Not anyone is going to need the ultra top model. I don't even know what to do with it. Yeah, we're not sending any rocket on Mars. The three of us don't need to send any rocket on Mars. For us, whether it's a 90% model or 99, for our daily life is more than perfect. I would imagine for majority of people, even a more basic model will work. So how do you monetize that very top investment for which billions of the investments need to be marginally to win the race? Not clear.
Can I ask you about one other big trend here in the US, which is digital finance tokenization? So stablecoin, a lot of the focus has been on stablecoin, but that's just step one, right? It's the first building block, if you want, of this digital world. It's not just the US anymore, right? There's a consortium of European banks thinking about issuing a euro-denominated stablecoin. Japan, there is just the first stablecoin that came out today. There's discussion in South Korea. So what is your view of those? And then what is being built on top through tokenization? There's a lot of new way of looking at finance that is taking, that's a lot of enthusiasm, at least on this side of the Atlantic.
So think about it. Already today, more than 99% of dollars are digital, meaning they're not in actual cash. Yes. So today the dollar is already digital. The only issue is for lots of cross-border transaction, is still the banking system is too costly. Basically, it's an outdated technology system. For cross-border payment, outdated. Now, one of the reasons why it's outdated is because, remember, after 9/11, the US went through Patriot Act, and basically, because with $120,000, a couple of terrorists committed that heinous crime of 9/11, the US said, okay, we're going to rewire all the financial system, and I want to have KYC, FATCA, know your customer, every single dollar has to be traced, and I want to know exactly who's behind it. And I think it was a very valid move, because with such little money can have such a devastating attack on your soul, on your land. I would have done exactly the same. Now the question comes for the administration now. You have 60 billion in payments on coins and stable coins daily, which no one knows who's the account holder, the KYC behind. And I want to feel comfortable with it. Yep. Simple from financing parents' perspective. Most of these, one thing is JP Morgan issue a stable coin, or a bunch of European banks issue a stable coin. They're highly regulated. all the customer, we know exactly who they are. It's very different if we move money, particularly in dollar terms, with people who don't know who they are. I mean, which currency do you think the narcos, are we using JP Morgan or are we using various coins?
That was the attempt of the Genius Act, right? To provide a framework or legislative regulatory framework to actually make it safer, if you want.
Absolutely. Sorry, I think, it has to be made safer very quickly at the speed of light. Because, if you think even the guy that attacked Moscow and the Bataclan were using crypto wallets, to get paid. The guy that attacked Moscow. So my concern is, I think making the system cheaper, fantastic. Making it less safe on KYC, given the level of risk, geopolitical risk, terrorism, narco trafficking, fentanyl, I think would be wrong. Now, don't get me wrong, innovation to make it cheaper, always best. But has to be balanced with the safety of the system.
As a global asset manager, David, what's your view on all the digital fund tokenization? You start already finding digitalized, tokenized T-bills, tokenized money market fund, equities are moving in that direction. I think it's at least on this side of the Atlantic, it seems to be going very fast.
Listen, I'm on the old, I come from old banking generation, military generation. I own personally 20% of physical gold in gold bars, central bank eligible. And I let all this buzzword, tokenized and complex. What I've learned in my 30 years experience, the more buzzword, the more complex it is, the less it's simple, the higher probability of you lose money or you get duped. And so I stay out of it happily. And actually, all those that talk about it, to me, there's always a reason why. Probably they couldn't, one of the reasons why they do it, because they couldn't win in the normal regulated world. And so they need to go. It's like you're not playing the NBA, you're in a different league, and then you start talking, mambo jumbo.
I have one last question, Davide. This is kind of subtle. I'll try and ask it correctly. And it has to do with the kind of research and information that's valuable. And I've been thinking a lot about this as editor-in-chief of the Institute. In the early 2000s, you'd see analyst reports, oh, Philip Morris or Kellogg is going to sell cereal or cigarettes to China. And we can do a simple analysis. We're going to add this many consumers to this product, and it makes the stock worth X. Today, as the world fragments and we have blocks and lots of things going on, it seems like discrete information is going to be more valuable. And I'll point to that conversation you had with the German arms maker. It seems to me this kind of information, where it's close to a particular trend and company and you're getting it directly from the source, is the kind of research that's going to make an investment difference. Am I right about that?
First of all, I think single data stock is less and less important. Let me tell you why. Today, money flows. 50% of global equity market is passive. So basically, the first question you need to ask is flows. Are flows going up? And then I can tell you market is going up, or flows are going down and market are going down. Doesn't matter what's the level. Secondly, for example, in this case, the CEO was not talking about his own company, he was talking about the industry, meaning how many bullets we have in Europe, how many bullets we have in America. It's a completely non-single stock. It's how many bullets we have in Europe, how many bullets we have in America, and how many they had in Ukraine. Yeah, which I would say, you don't need a 5-star generals to ask this question. Yeah. That was to give you an anecdote of the underinvestments for years that happened in Europe. So the catch-up that is needed. Then I would say, to me, what is very important is to keep on having critical thinking. Why? If more and more people use LLMs, for example, I'll give you an idea. We hire some of the best European we can get. And let's say we pay more than the equivalent as a small shop. We pay top dollars equal to, the who's who of American firms. And for the first time, we had 2 interns that came with, CV, pedigree that looked fantastic, they were absolutely useless. Why? They clearly made all their academic track record cheating on this LLM. And we can't use an external LLM. We blocked the LLM. They had to do the job in the old-fashioned way, and they couldn't. So that, to me, I'm not sure, because the tool is fantastic as long as your creativity and how you've been trained allows you to use it. I mean, I'll give an anecdote. If I give you a supercomputing power and you bring it someone in Nigeria to a bunch of militants that were shooting with Kalashnikov, they don't know what to do with it. Yeah. So the issue is you need to have the right tool in the right hands. And right now, people are over focused on the tool. I'm actually more focused on, is the right brain use the right tool? For example, for me, there's no point in me giving me a supercomputer. I don't know what to do with it. Now, I have a team that uses it, and we ask questions, and they know how to interrogate it, and we test all our hypotheses, and it's very useful. Again, it's a tool. By the way, yesterday I was, testing it. What we can do on basic computation with the energy of a light bulb, LLM model need the energy of 18 million laptops. At the time of scarce resource, overusing energy for tasks that can be done by our brain using, just one light bulb rather than 18 million laptops is clearly sub-efficient. Now, for complex stuff, if you need to develop a new medicine, absolutely, let's use AI. For mundane tasks, I think we better train human bodies, human brain, because we're the most efficient computer available on Earth. And so I would actually, eventually, I would imagine the business model is such that we cannot waste 200 million times more energy for stupid tasks.
Even the Google versus various LLM, right?
I mean,
10
sorry,
times.
if you need, of course, even Google is 10 times, but there is a point where eventually, this is Pareto and efficient, and it's totally wrong. And the issue is, who's going to pay? Why? For something that, for you takes 1 second, why are you going to spend 200 million times more energy? We won't be able to finance it. So, someone won't be able to pay. It's as simple as that. It's just cold math. Makes no sense, basically. So now, that does not mean that for 30 particular application at certain level will be used. And this idea, what I don't understand, they have the idea that they can fire 20% of workers, less bright. And who's going to pay for them? What are we going to do with these people? What's going to happen to consumption? What's going to happen to housing? What's going to happen to social cohesion? Yeah. And who's going to make up the difference? So I think some of these are still untested question for which there are no clear answer. And I think it's more than rational to have some doubts vis-a-vis the current propaganda. And by the way, what I think is extraordinary, now I count for how many seconds someone presenting an investment case or an idea does not, by which point they mention the word AI. Yeah. And I think by the speed at which they mention it, then I can tell you whether they have a proper argument or they don't have any argument.
All right, one last question before we close. This is Fed week here. I'm not going to ask you what you think the Fed will do. I think that seems pretty settled. But more like, what do you think the Fed should do over the next, say, 2 to 4 quarters? And how importantly, and that was part of what Craig and I were trying to write down in that editorial, how should communicate, right? Because Mark seems to be fixated with the dot plot. Whatever the Fed communication attempt is, it's seen as a firm forward guidance. And that's feeding into all the stuff you were saying, right? Your valuations, enthusiasm. There's a lot of uncertainty both about the outlook, I think, and the structural forces that we have discussed here.
Yeah, listen, I think, forward guidance, it's a risky strategy for central bank. And I think, to be honest, we got here because we massively screwed up in 2006, 7, 8 with a global financial crisis. And then basically we had to engage in QE, monetizing debt, and basically bringing artificially the price of bonds below where they should have been. to restart money velocity. So zero rates and quantitative easing then was a proper tool at that point. It's like when you get, when you have a heart attack and someone, use a defibrillator on you. The issue is if you keep it for too long, you run the risk of then killing the patient. And as we never did it, probably we overdid it. And back rates then with COVID and inflation shock plus easy money, that had to be reined back. I'm not a fan of forward guidance. I prefer the old model where central bank gave no indication. The market sets whatever they want to set, and the central bank does whatever they want to do. Because this pre-committing in the future is like you committing at beginning of the year what you're going to do, and you tell your boss and everybody else what you're going to do, and then priority changes, data changes, and every time it gets more complex because in a way you have pre-committed. Then I'm also sympathetic with Secretary Treasury Scott Bessent, which I've known for many years and highly regard, trust, and respect, on the fact that across the world, some central bankers at the time of quantitative easing got a bit out of their comfort zone, because de facto they had the strongest and the largest, if you think about it, we started the global financial crisis with central banks on an aggregate basis having $1 trillion of total assets, when now they have 25 trillion. It's like if they built 10 JP Morgan in the space of 15 years. That gave you lots of power. Now, not necessarily all used at the right time. And I think some of them went out of, all sorts of missions that were not their core mission. This is valid certainly for the ECB and partly the Fed. So I think in a way, going back to the older model of being data dependent and not pre-committing on dots, I think will be better. Might provide a bit more volatility, but will also, in my view, create less stress in the system. Because the day you're wrong, you can change your mind. And, the future so far is still unknown. But we're going to wait for the next ChatGPT and AIs that are going to give us what the future is going to look like. And then at that point, the problem is solved.
You should communicate at least some scenarios that you have in mind, right, behind your decision making. Otherwise, there's so much uncertainty that path it's playing into this fog, and it's not clear how to read. At least scenarios, in my mind, at least, kind of remove some of the fog.
I agree, but for example, look at the ECB. They don't have dots, and it works. I'd rather listen to the minutes on the discussion, see the rationale behind it, and the decision we're taking today. Because let's be clear, none of us can forecast the weather accurately on a 2 weeks view. Yeah. So, and I tell even probably, Sam Altman, if you ask him what's going to happen, are you going to go skiing 2 weekends? Is it going to be sunny or not? He doesn't know either. So the fact that the central bank is going to know what happens in the next 6, 9, 12 months with that degree of certainty, I think it's an overconfidence of your own ability. Now you can tell what you think is going to happen, but the probability are low, and you can see the fact how they got wrong the inflation numbers, and the same in Europe, by the way. If you look at forecasts vis-a-vis actual, where the numbers are, it's quite funny. Over 15 years, so this is an apolitical comment. It's not of any single administration, color, or head of the central bank. Yeah, it's of the institution itself. I think the economic profession should be a bit more humble. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us, Davide.
Bye-bye.